Hi
Am
guys,
I?
good evening. Welcome to this analysis session. I hope I am audible and visible. So today we had CLAT 2025 and I am assuming and I'm hoping that all of you enjoyed giving the paper and are expecting great marks. So Prem happened to be one of the students who appeared for CLAT today. Prem is a third year NLS student right now and also an NLTI mentor for 2 years. He got an All India rank of 16 in his final CLAT paper that he appeared for in 2023. And so today he decided that he'll also appear for this paper to experience what the CLAT aspirants are going through right now, and also to help you analyze the paper after it is over and potentially discuss the correct answers to all the questions that are disputed primarily. So Prem, over to you. Take this session forward, and let's hope people benefit from it. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Anish. So you might be wondering why I took the paper, right? I'm already in the college that most people want to be in, and so why did I go ahead and take the paper today? I always say when I'm teaching that you can't take advice from someone who hasn't had the same experience as you have. And I've had that experience once when I took CLAT in 2022, but I decided that I should have that experience again. I think that's how I'd be most effectively able to communicate with you, to understand where you're coming from, and which is why I took the paper today. So, for those of you who took the paper and who are watching this before the results are out, I'm sure that you're ridden by anxiety. You're concerned about what your results are going to be. You have a lot of problems, I'm sure, in logical reasoning and in quants, as even I experienced during the paper. So, we will discuss those, we will go through those. We can discuss what there is to expect in terms of what could the cutoff look like, in terms of which section was easy, in terms of which questions were incorrect, because there were quite a few of them, particularly in logical reasoning and possibly even in quants. So we're going to go through them today. I want to through the paper step by step. But before we go through the questions, before we go through the paper step by step, just a general discussion on what curveballs we saw this year compared to the previous years. The very first curveball, as I'm sure is on everyone's mind, is analytical reasoning. Now, analytical reasoning ordinarily appears only in ALET, but it just so happened that we also saw this in CLAT this time. It was one set of about, if I remember, 5 to 6 questions, but that one set could have thrown an aspirant off if they weren't prepared for what they were going to see, which is why I always say be prepared for the unexpected. And in that way, you won't be thrown off when you're taking the actual paper. I believe that's what could have happened to some aspirants today. The second curveball was that legal and GK were mixed up. In order for you to have effectively answered a couple questions in legal, you ought to have had external legal knowledge. Now, this is contrary to the consortium's guidelines and settled wisdom and precedent, as has been in the past 3 or 4 papers. Generally, we expect that all the principles that we require will be available in the legal passage, and all we need to do is apply the available principles. But that's not what we saw in today's paper. And someone who came more equipped with legal knowledge, who had an idea of what the law was, would be much more effectively prepared to tackle those questions. That's the second one. The last one is not entirely new, but is still an unexpected curveball, is that a lot of GK questions were available in the passage. This meant that even if you didn't know what the answer could be, you could either guess it, which was fairly easy to derive from the passage, or the information was directly available in the passage. So we're going to go through some of those questions as well to figure out what's going to happen. For the rest of them, there were a couple questionable options or questions in English or logical, but those are standard or routine in every paper, and I trust that the consortium will resolve them when we have the opportunity to present our objections, right? So these were the new experiences that you could have expected if you took CLAT this time. I think otherwise the pattern remained fairly standard. Everything remained the same. Besides this, what's unusual is a wrong question in quants, which we will shortly explore. But that has the potential to throw anyone off if they were taking quants, like let's say if it was not their last section. So we'll discuss all this. But before that, just some general comments on each section. English was fairly easy. Now, that can be a good thing and that can be a bad thing. It can be a good thing because, of course, you're not stressed. It's your very first section and you'll score well. It can be a bad thing because if it's easy for you, there's a good chance that it's easy for everyone. And the kind of easy is something that we could probably compare to CLAT 2024, where all the many, and in fact, most of the answers were available in the passage. It didn't require any kind of understanding, any kind of inference, any kind of reasoning. All you had to do was read the passage, pick out the line, and blindly copy paste that onto your option. So we saw many of those in English. Overall, for that reason, I will conclude that English was fairly easy. However, that doesn't stop there from being a few curveballs, particularly in the vocabulary section, which we will shortly discuss. But besides that, overall, I think English was fairly easy. And out of 24, like a good score to expect, I would say, is like, let's say, 19 plus or 18 plus or so. But English is definitely a section that you could have scored quite well in if you paid close attention. um, of course, I'm not testing myself or comparing myself to an aspirant, of course, but I believe that this was the easiest section that the aspirant could have encountered. The second one was GK, and I'm sure a lot of you were disappointed because you put in extensive preparation, tried to digest as much knowledge there is out there. But in the end, a lot of this was not necessarily current, and nor was it difficult to decipher. So there's a good chance that nearly everyone, including even I wasn't thoroughly prepared with GK, but I could answer more or less all the questions, given that they were all available in the passage. So that's what we saw in GK. Now let's come to legal. Legal felt like more of a reading section, felt similar to English language or to legal logical reasoning than it was with the traditional legal. In legal, you'd usually expect there to be a set of principles and you'd apply them to the facts. Now, while there were certain principal application questions available, they were very superficial. You didn't have to read too much into the principle. It was a bare bones application of what was there in the passage. However, most of them weren't even fact principle application based questions. Most of them were rather reading comprehension section questions, in the sense that you're expected to look at the passage, read what's in the passage, and then answer the options. So that's another difference that we saw in legal this year that we usually don't see in the previous years. In my experience, legal has been one such section which is very heavily application based. You look at a principle and you apply it to facts. We didn't see too many of those kinds of questions in legal this time. So legal just felt like an extension of the reading comprehension section. And don't beat yourself up over it if you took the most time in this section. Naturally, you will, because it has the most questions, and also because some of these were a little difficult to decide between. Finally, also because you might not have had the necessary legal knowledge to be able to answer many of these questions, right? So that concludes legal. Overall, I would say legal was also on the easier end, given that it was similar to RC in that you could just apply what's there in the passage, or you just had to read what's there in the passage and mark the option without much thought. So there were many questions like those in legal. So overall, I will say legal was also easy. GK, on the other hand, was, I think, easy if you paid attention to the passage. So I hope that you guys had paid attention to the passage as well. Finally, let's come to logical. Um, Now, logical threw a fair few curveballs, also because of the analytical reasoning section. I'm sure most of you solved the first passage with some ease, I think fair ease, although there were again some questionable options that we will come to discuss. But logical was, I wouldn't say very easy. There were definitely a few curveballs, and if you were thrown off by the analytical reasoning question, as even I was, then that could have impacted the way that you proceeded with the rest of your paper. So not we're going to discuss the analytical reasoning set in much depth. We're not going to do that now. But let's go on to discussing like generally how logical was. Besides that, I think logical was also somewhat similar to English and legal in that all you had to do was read the passage and then you had to apply that onto the options, onto the answers. So there was not much rigorous thinking involved in that respect. Finally, let's come to quants. Now, what was interesting about quants this year is that a caselet based approach might not have helped you. If you're an aspirant who's used to sitting down, drawing a caselet, and then elaborately making sure that all information is slotted in that caselet, there's a good chance that you missed a lot of the, or just digested a lot of unnecessary information, or just missed a lot of information, especially given that you usually have a paucity of time when you're at quantitative. So at quantitative, I found that the best approach was to directly look at the questions, especially in the first set. The first set did not require you to extensively read the information in the passage. In fact, I scarcely referred to the information in the passage. I directly went to the questions here. There was not much correlation between the two. So it was no point for me to sit down and draw a caselet at length. All I had to do was look at the questions. I think this is an approach that would have favored you if you took this. Otherwise, you might have ended up risking wasting a lot of time on trying to understand the information in the passage. On to the second set, which is Mr. Das and his family and his total monthly income. This is also slightly objectionable because we'll come to the exact reasons when we're dissecting the question. But the question stem was not exactly clear on what the base amount was, what the salary amount was it 9228 plus 10% of 9228, or was it 9228 only? So we will discuss that as well. And finally, I believe that one of the questions in this set, specifically the second last one on the saving of 30,000 rupees, could have acted as a curveball because it was an incorrect one that did not have an immediately clear answer. Now that that's out of the way, let's begin by doing a question by question analysis. Let's start with English language here. So I think English language was more or less very simple. I will go through some of the questions that were a little problematic. For those questions that were fairly straightforward, so this is something that you could decipher directly from the passage. You didn't require much thought here. So I'm not going to dwell on this one. This one could have been a source of confusion for many aspirants, which is why I've marked this question as well. So if you look at this, there are two options that you can get confused between. One is this option, it will create confusion and fear, or this option, that the child will get into a conflict. So the exact lines from which you can derive this is somewhere up here. It says to enclose him in the framework is to encourage him to conform, which breeds fear and produces in him a constant conflict between what he is and what he should be. All inward conflicts have their outward manifestations. That's it. This is all that you had to refer to. Now, once you refer to this, it's still unclear whether you should mark B or C, because it does say that it breeds fear. So you might be inclined towards looking at B. But at the same time, it says that it leads to conflict. However, C is not clear on what kind of conflict. Is it external conflict? Is it internal conflict? What is the nature of this conflict? And it also misses the fact that it breeds fear. So this is also a consequence that's not covered by this option. For that reason, I believe that this question in general could be disputed. It could be a source of confusion for many aspirants. I'm not going to make any final judgments on what the answer should be. We will find out when the consortium releases it. But I personally, I went with option B because I believe that it was important to cover the aspect of fear and the fact that internal conflict could also be a form of confusion that develops in the child. So I used that logic and I went with B. But of course, this might have been a disputed or a difficult question for some aspirants. 3 was also fairly easy. 4 was also fairly easy. This was easy. There's nothing that you had to do here. What is the antonym for the word volatile? I marked all of the above here. I believe that all of the above is the correct one. Some of you might have been juggling between whether you should go between A, B, and C. Let's come to the second passage on an astrologer's day. Again, this is vocabulary based, so all you have to do is know the meaning of vociferous. This could have been a source of confusion. When did the astrologer usually start his day's business? So you might have.
Prem, I'm really sorry to interrupt. Uh, yeah,
Yeah,
could you please go through the correct answers also, like the answer just in one line, whichever answer that you have mentioned or you have
yeah,
selected for the simplest of the
sure,
answer questions also. Just state
sure.
in one line that this is the correct answer that you have marked.
Let's do that as well. Then a lot of you might be wondering what the correct answer is. Let me also pull out my OMA response sheet to see what I marked.
Yeah,
This one, this is A. I believe that's fairly simple. B, I've discussed there is potential for conflict. 3 would be C here. This is directly available in the passage. This is also directly available in the passage. It's D. 5 would be uh, B. This is also directly available in the passage. 6 would be D. This is something that you would have vocabulary knowledge of. Coming to 7 would be A. This is fairly simple if you know what the meaning of vociferous is. Now let's come to 8. 8 could be a source of dispute for many aspirants. Now you might have looked at the very last line and said, the astrologer transacted his business by the light of a flare, which crackled and smoked up, etc., etc. But on the other hand, the passage starts with the word punctually at midday. He opened his bag and spread out his professional equipment. The question is, when did the astrologer start his business? So is it punctually at midday or is it by the light of a flare? Now, I went with option C. The reason being, the question is asking concerns one of temporality. The question is asking, when did the astrologer start his business? The words midday answer the question of when did he start? When did he start his business? However, when you say he transacted his business by the light of the fire, you're merely telling me what his location was when he was transacting his business. That was next to the light of a flare. So this would not be the correct option in my opinion. But then again, this is a source of dispute. I personally went with C. Coming to 9, 9 was also directly available in the passage. 10, I believe that the closest one. So there could be a source of dispute between sparkle and dazzling, but I believe dazzling more emphatically uh, drives the point home of being bright and colorful. So I went with dazzling here. 11, which of the following is not a trade or occupation? This is also directly available. If you read the passage closely, you will find that there is no one selling cheap bags. 12, which of the following used to attract Bombay ice cream? Again, this is fairly simple. This didn't even require a close reading of the passage. It's the groundnut seller. Now let's come to George Orwell's Why I Write. This is a very interesting book for those who haven't read it yet. I do recommend reading it. It's a brilliant book to read. Now let's come to question number 13. Loneliness in his childhood led to making up stories. This is present in the very first line. Again, not difficult at all. Why does Orwell give background information? This he states himself because it's essential to know about the motives of writers. So directly derived from the passage. 17. This is also directly available in the passage. The exact words are not loses his urge, but I believe the exact words are something along the lines of let's figure it out. Where were the exact words? Um, Yes. If he escapes from his early influences, he will have killed his impulse to write. So it's the same as losing your urge to have written. For the author, question number 16 now. For the author, aesthetic enthusiasm is an important motive for writing because it. Now, this could be a source of dispute, but I still believe that there is or there could be a correct answer for this one. It's not immediately clear that George Orwell says that aesthetic enthusiasm is an important motive for any reason. He's merely describing the four form of motives. He's not saying that it's important per se. So it's okay or it's understandable if you fell in some confusion about what he's saying about this. But for this, you only had to refer to this portion of the passage and to decipher. I think this required some inferential reasoning. So we can let's go by the process of elimination here. It's definitely not C, because all the passage says here is that desire to aesthetic enthusiasm. When you write out of aesthetic enthusiasm, it essentially means that you have a desire to share an experience which you feel is valuable and should not be missed. So just because you write something out of that motive, it doesn't mean it becomes invaluable. So we're going to eliminate this immediately. It also doesn't say anything about shaping thoughts, so we're going to eliminate that as well. It doesn't also say anything about creating an artistic piece. Sure, if you write because you have some motivation along these lines, you could end up creating an artistic piece, but none of that is described here. So we are definitely not going to go for artistic piece. Now, marking D, which is what I did, requires some understanding of what it means for something to be utilitarian. When something is utilitarian, means it has some utility. It means it has some end use, right? So here it's clear here just from the understanding. If you understand what it means to write out of aesthetic enthusiasm, you will understand that it does not arise from a utilitarian impulse. You're not writing because the writing has some use, because it has some utility, or it has some end use. You're writing just because you have a desire to share an experience, right? So in that sense, it is non-utilitarian. So I have marked D here, but I understand if aspirants were confused here and if this becomes a source of conflict. Again, I will only tell you what I've marked. I could be wrong, and we will have to wait and see what the final answer key says, not just the consortium's initial answer key, but also the one that they approved after objections. But from what I can decipher from 16, I believe that D might be correct. Let's come to 17. The author strongly advocates for. So if you read the passage, the author did not advocate for anything. He was merely describing the different forms of purposes. He was not recommending that an author take a certain kind of approach or have a certain kind of motive. So let's come to 18. 18, I believe, is a little bit, it could be a source of dispute. It could either be B or D. This is all I will say. I think it can go both ways. I will still have to look up. I have not looked up the vocabulary definition of turbulent. So let's just do that very briefly to figure out sorry, not turbulent, tumultuous. In my experience, the consortium will usually take the first 3, 4 synonyms that you find when you Google something, and then they will go ahead and paste that onto the final answer key. So just as I've Googled it right here, my screen is open. Let me briefly share this tab, right? So once you must see on this tab, I don't immediately find, let's see what the options are. Chaotic, so it's there down here, and the other options are the other option that we need to check is disorderly. So chaotic, disorderly, and turbulent are all mentioned in these synonyms. At the same time, because I understand what it means for something to be turbulent and tumultuous, I would hesitate from calling something that's turbulent disorderly. There are many disorderly things that are not tumultuous or turbulent. So, say for example, if your room is unclean and if your items are all over the place, you'd call your room disorderly, but you wouldn't necessarily call it tumultuous or turbulent. These have very different connotations. As a result of which, I marked B for boy, but I believe that it can go both ways. And honestly, if you end up at B or if you end up at D, I think both are justified. We will have to wait and see what the consortium's final answer key says. It could be B or it could be D. I personally went with B for boy, right? So let's move on to the next passage. This passage was very simple, very straightforward. So this is none of the above directly mentioned in the passage. This is all of the above. This requires you to read between the lines to an extent. What is the aim of education? Strength of mind, character is formed, and can stand on one's feet. You might be wondering from where we got livelihood. When you stand on one's feet, conventionally we call it having your ability to fulfill your own livelihood, to have your own livelihood. So that's where we got the word livelihood from, stand on one's feet. So all these three boxes are checked, which is why I believe the answer is all of the above. The country wants its massive willpower. They do say nerve and they do say steel, but please do not be confused. It says what our country needs, wants now, are muscles of iron and nerves of steel. They don't literally need iron and steel industries, which is an entirely different thing. So they want, what they want here are gigantic wills. This entire line is referring to possessing the willpower to be able to do something. So your answer is going to be A. 22 is fairly simple, directly mentioned in the passage, all of the above. 23 is also directly mentioned in the passage, it's concentration of mind. Now, this one again could be a source of dispute, which is why I have marked this as well. Notice here that the question stem of 24 is different from the question stem in 18. 18 asks you what is the synonym. 24 is asking you which of the following words is related to, right? So it's not asking you for a synonym. I don't think you should mark this as if you were to mark a synonym question. What does it mean for something to be related to? I personally mark all of the above. Now, strictly speaking, integration and acclimatization are not synonyms of the word assimilation. However, it's possible that when you are assimilating, you're also integrating. Or when you're assimilating, let's say you've moved into a new city and you're assimilating into that society, it also means that you could be getting acclimatized to the environment, to the people there, which is why I believe that they're all related words, but they're not necessarily synonyms. So if the question asked me which of the following words are synonyms, I would have probably only marked one of them. But because the question is asking me related to, I have gone ahead and marked all of the above. Then again, this is also, I believe, a potential source of dispute. We will see what the answer key has to say. I'm not going to spend too much time. Let's come to general knowledge now. I'm not going to spend too much time here because a lot of this is objective as well. And there's a lot of, all you have to do is usually Google these questions. I personally haven't Googled them either, but I will tell you what I marked, or at least let's point out where in the passage could you find certain forms of information. So this one I think is fairly simple. I don't. This one you've all studied in your NCRT textbook. So if you paid attention in your history class in ninth grade, in 10th grade, then it probably served you well here. Let's come to 26, which of the following is true in the context of the civil disobedience movement. Now this could be a little bit of a concern. Um, I believe that the correct answer was option B here. The passage explicitly states the roundtable conference was a failure, so we're going to remove this, and it explicitly says that some working class participated in the movement, so you're going to reject this. And this I could not find anywhere else. And just historically, from what we know generally about Indian history, this did not make much sense to me, so I went with option B. Let's come to 27. Again, this I did not have much clue of. I did not spend my time studying GK for CLAT, honestly speaking. So this, I believe that I marked option A, although this was not immediately clear from the passage. C said it's a concern to industrialists and not for Congress, so I don't think the answer is C. And B was not clear to me either. So honestly, this one could go either way, but I've only told you what I ended up marking. Which of the following statements is correct with reference to the civil disobedience movement? This is, we cannot find this in the passage. All it says is that this raised concerns of militancy, not necessarily that there was militancy. It did it urge the industrialists to accept socialism? I couldn't find it from the passage. And again, from what I know from Indian history, this also doesn't make sense. Both A and C don't make sense because that was the goal of the civil disobedience movement, to not have militancy. So I went ahead and went with B. 29, which of the following mass movement was supported by the Indian industrialists? Now, honestly, the passage says here that the industrialists initially supported the civil disobedience movement, supported when it was first launched. So you might be tempted to go ahead and mark B for boy. However, it also says eventually here that business groups were no longer uniformly enthusiastic after the failure of the Roundtable Conference. So it's not that they supported the movement in its entirety. This can go either way. And to be honest, I don't know enough Indian history to say which way it goes. But I personally, I marked the Quit India movement. It could be, or it could not be. This was a guess on my part. But there's a good chance it could also be the civil disobedience movement or any other answer. Like I said, we can usually figure out what GK is about by doing a simple Google search. So this I found, this was an interesting one. I found this in the passage. I also found this in the passage, but this was not immediately clear to me. It just, all what that was raised about socialistic influence was that the industrialists were concerned about socialistic influence, not necessarily that there was socialistic influence. But despite this, I went ahead and marked all of the above because I could definitely find option A and option B in the passage. So like I said, if you looked at the passage, you'll see there are a lot of the options. You could read between the lines in the passage and end up answering the options. Let's come to 31. This one again, this, I think you could find this in the passage as well, but I don't know about this bill in particular. So if you look at the very second line, it says the linking of the implementation of the act to the long-term exercises of census makes little sense to many. Therefore, you could see that this one is probably going to come in force after the census, because the passage says that it is linked to the implementation of the census, which is why I went ahead and marked C. This is directly there in the passage. This is very simple to mark. All these contradict the idea mentioned in the passage. 33, again, this is also there in the passage. So in this sense, this is not really a GK question. This is also very simple. It's C. 34, this amendment aims to do what exactly? So if you know anything about the 330 and 332nd article and the amendment to them, you will realize that none of these are exactly correct. So we are going to go for D for dog. It's fairly objective, fairly simple. I'm not going to go in much depth in this Olympics passage. Honestly, I don't know enough to be able to answer them well, but nevertheless, I've guessed many of these questions. Let's come to some questions where there could be some conflict in this passage. According to the passage, also note here, very interesting language to be used. They themselves acknowledge and they realize that a lot of the information that they're asking is mentioned in the passage. So in this sense, it becomes more of a reading comprehension section than it does a GK section. What is the peculiarity of the Paris Olympics 2024? So this was definitely mentioned in the passage. This was also mentioned in the passage. And it says this happened for the first time. These are the exact words it used. So as a result of which, I thought it was appropriate, because I definitely saw these two, to go ahead and mark D, because all of these are mentioned in the passage. Now, B is something that you could not find in the passage here in 37. You could not find C either. And honestly, C would contradict the idea. Sorry, which of the following incidents support the argument that the geopolitical backdrop is no less troubling? Right, so they're trying to ask you what is the troubling incident that lurks in the background of the Olympics. And so the political stability of the French government would not exactly be a troubling incident, so this would contradict the question being asked, which is why I went with A, also because this was directly mentioned in the passage. Let's come to 38. Tokyo Olympics was better than Beijing Olympics. Now, obviously, the words better don't mean anything, so they should immediately ring alarm bells. You should mark this away. You should also mark this away as a result, because you're eliminating A as well. Let's see between B and C. Now, the passage explicitly says that there are incidents of conflict that are going to be affecting the Olympics. So you can safely eliminate C as well, and you can go with B for boy. Again, you can see that this is very passage based. 39 is objective. We don't need to dwell too much time on it. 40, you could also end up deriving from the passage. I might be incorrect on this one, but the passage began with saying the opening ceremony took place outside a stadium setting by the river for the first time. I didn't know which river this was done before, and I'm not sure of where the opening ceremony was. But the fact that the passage said it was by the river meant that I went ahead and marked A, because only A here seems to be a river. Let's come to the next one. This is fairly simple, fairly objective questions here. This also you can derive from the passage because it talks extensively about Jammu and Kashmir's legislative assembly. Again, this is objective, some GK that you should have already had. This is also objective, some GK that you should have already had. This you can derive, you can eliminate this from the passage. You can eliminate this from the passage because it says 14 new districts were formed in 2019. So if you look at this, by 2019 had recognized areas of 14 districts. So it's not 15, it's 14. So you can eliminate this and go ahead and mark this. Now, this was also, I think, all of this was also mentioned directly in the passage. You didn't see the launch of a currency as such, and there was no de-escalation. So you will go for C, which was directly mentioned here. This is also requires you to have some external knowledge. This is fairly simple. This requires you to have some external knowledge as well. This was not mentioned in the passage. You could not derive it from there. So for those of you who have studied your BRICS well, you will realize that you can answer this one. Now let's come to 50. 50 is essentially referring to Jim O'Neill's critique, no one else, and this is mentioned directly in the passage. And the critique is C, it's not all of the above. 51 says the emergence of BRICS signals. So you would definitely not able to derive this and this from the passage. These were just not mentioned. So you might be conflicted between A and D. But from what I saw, there was nothing that signaled an Asian consolidation of economic power. Rather, as Jim O'Neill, the economist, would say, that this could end up being the lack of a consolidation of power because of India and China's consistent conflicts. As a result of which, you would mark D. Also, because D is directly mentioned here. Let me see. Let me show you the exact portion where D is mentioned. Can get together, highlight how good it is to be a part of something that does not involve the US. So, which is why we would say it's a geopolitics without US dominance. That's 51. Let's come to 52. Which of the following below is an outcome of the 16th BRICS meeting? Now, this one is again fairly simple. This is mentioned in the passage in the very first paragraph. Nothing that you had to know or derive from outside that. So if you paid close attention to the passage, and unfortunately this is how GK turned out to be, you'll find a lot of the questions were available in the passage and you didn't have to know much outside the passage, right? Now that we're done with GK, let's go ahead and come to our legal reasoning section. A lot of you might have some troubles here. So the relevant principles, this is all background information, so most of this you did not even need. The relevant principles are all mentioned here in these areas, right? So these are the relevant principles that we're going to be referring to. Let's come to 53. An Indian company collects personal data. What must the company do before sharing the data? This is fairly simple. It's mentioned in the passage. The entity must either take the concerned individual's consent or for legitimate uses, which include situations where individual voluntarily provided data, right? So because there's no voluntariness in the giving of data here, you would have to require them to provide explicit consent, which is why I went ahead and marked option A. Now let's see 54. Under the digital, what must the platform do? This is also fairly simple. It's mentioned here that there is a right to withdraw consent on the data being processed. So once the consent is withdrawn, you can go ahead and remove the data or stop processing that data. So you'd say B, that they have to comply with the legal requirements. The next one is also on similar lines. Now, a lot of you might have an issue with this because this is not necessarily the right to access has nowhere been mentioned in the passage. Rather, the what has been mentioned is a right to have the summary of the data that's being collected. So let's look at the relevant portions here. Right to get a summary of all the collected data. Having a summary is not the same as having the right to access the data, although it's arguable that they are similar. None of these can be inferred, however. Right to correction is definitely there, but it's not something that allows them to request this information to know what data has been collected. The right to correction will obviously allow you to correct that data. So we can definitely say that it's not going to be B either. And of course, data portability is not mentioned. This is not data portability. So you'd end up with C. There's nothing else you could have possibly marked here just by the process of elimination. Now let's come to 56. Health tracking app. What additional precautions must the startup take compared to regular personal data? Now, the only one here that would accord with the principles is that you would ask them to take consent. So, of course, we're going to look at 56B, which is the only one that asks them to take consent because that's what the principles say. that the individual's consent must be free, specific, informed, etc., etc. So you would go with 56B here. Now let's come to 57. I didn't have to verify each and every one of them, and this is a tip for most aspirants generally who are going through bit by bit, going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Just check, is one there? Yes. So one is definitely going to be there because it's there in all four options. So you don't even have to check one because you know one is there for a fact. Let's come to 2 now. Check if 2 is there. So 2 is also been mentioned in the passage. Now, because I know 2 is definitely there, I'm going to eliminate B and C quickly because they don't mention 2 at all. Now, all I have to do is figure out the difference between A and D. The difference between A and D is that they don't have 3 and 4. So now I'm going to check if 3 is there. 3 is also mentioned in the passage. So naturally, I'm going to eliminate this because this one doesn't have 3 and go directly with D. So I didn't have to go through all of them, go through 4, 5, 6 as well. Right? That's the approach that I took here. Let's come to this passage now on misconduct and examinations. A bill becomes an act. Now, this is an interesting one. You could derive this from the passage, arguably, because it starts with notified by the union government, received assent from the president. So, because the assent of the president comes after the notification, you would see that this is a final step in a bill being converted into a legislation. As a result of which, you could say that a bill becomes an act only when the president gives assent. Otherwise, if you didn't read these lines closely, it's also possible that you just use your general legal knowledge to answer this question. So D would be the answer here. 59. Now, this is a source of dispute. A lot of you might have marked either B or D. The reason for this is that the correct prescribed punishment is mentioned above here. The correct prescribed punishment is 1 crore, but before that, it also says up to 5 years imprisonment. And this is the keyword, and a fine of up to 1 crore for malpractices. So the provision has both these kinds of penalties. Do you choose the option? And if you notice here, A, B, C, or D, none of them mention the 5-year imprisonment. All they mention is the fine of up to 1 crores. So obviously you'll eliminate A because it says fine of 1 crores and not up to 1 crores. You'll eliminate C because this is not mentioned at all. So now your dispute is whether you should go between B or you should go for B or you should go for D. D is most definitely, when you go for D, the idea is that you are pointing to the fact that 5 years imprisonment has not been mentioned. However, you can also go for B because it is true and it is correct that there shall be a fine of up to 1 crore. I personally went with B for boy. A lot of you might have marked D as well, and it's okay if you mark D. But when you say that it's none of the above, you say that all these three are definitely not correct. B is partially correct, however. I understand that it excludes the existence of the 5 years imprisonment, but B was still partially correct. So I personally went with B. Let's see how the final answer key looks like. Nevertheless, you'll see that these are very, very simple questions. This question number 60 is also a fairly simple question. You have to look for something that is between 3 to 5 years, and you have to look for something that has a maximum cap of 10 lakhs, right? So just on that basis, you'll eliminate all of this and you'll land up with D. That's mentioned right here. So if you read this closely, you'll end up marking D. Let's come to 61 now. Identify which of the following is not an unfair means relating to the conduct of a public examinations. This is obviously very simple. You guys have taken many mocks and mock tests from coaching institutes, from NLTI, from many different places. And obviously that taking mock test by itself is not an unfair means. You don't need to refer to the principles of the passage in detail to be able to answer this question. A lot of these questions, as I will show, even logical, are fairly commonsensical, and in fact, you can't find them in the passage. Now let's come to 62. Which of the following is not a service provider in the context of a public examination? So if you notice the definition of a service provider, when it asks you this question, you have to go back to the passage where it defines a service provider. So let's look at where service provider is defined. It's defined here. It says a service provider engaged by the public examination shall also be liable to be published with blah 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 blah. But also before that, look at this part. A service provider engaged by the public examination authority. So when we say service provider, we're not referring to anyone who provides a service. We're talking about a service provider who is engaged with the public examination authority. Now, a coaching center does provide services. If you've understood some consumer law, if you know what services are, offering coaching is a form of service. However, it is not affiliated with the public examination authority. And therefore, the correct answer is A, because it cannot be a service provider. These three, on the other hand, are all associated with the public examination authority. As a result of which, they all will be service providers, also because they provide services. So 62 is going to be A. Let's come to this one now. In which of the following changes were introduced for environmental protection? Now, this one again is not exactly a legal question. You just have to read the passage and answer based on the passage. And you also have to have a little bit of legal knowledge. The reason I say you have to have some legal knowledge is because you have to know that Article 48A forms part of the directive principles of state policy and 51G forms part of fundamental duties. There's nothing here that relates to fundamental rights according to the 42nd Amendment Act. So, because there's nothing on fundamental rights in the 42nd Amendment Act, you will not mark this. And if you know that 48 is about DPSP and 51 is about duties, so this is going to be 48 and this is going to be 51, then you will know that it's 2 and 3. So I personally marked 2 and 3 here. So this requires you to have some external legal knowledge. And for those of you who studied and prepared for that, you were rewarded for it. Let's come to 64. Now, 64 is essentially a question on legal drafting. It's asking you what is the kind of question here, what is the kind of drafting here that will end up leading to describing a binding commitment. And the keyword is binding commitment. So you need to read the lines. This is not mentioned in the passage at all. You need to read the lines and figure out which among the four signals something that is binding. Just give me one moment. Right? So if you read the options, you'll see that they all differ in the operative words used here. Shall, may, should, may. And should here is said explore the possibility. So when you're just exploring a possibility, it's not a binding commitment. The one that is binding is A because it uses the word shall. It's mandatory language. So this requires you to have a little bit of an idea of how these words operate in the law. So that's done for 64. Now on 65, I was personally a little bit unsure of this, but let us just go ahead and recap what Article 51A says. Article 51A of the Indian Constitution. Let's see what duties it contains. Right? So 51AG, forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for living creatures. So you had to have some external knowledge of what exactly is contained in Article 51A. If you did, you would go ahead and mark. I think this was a little bit confusing as well. So if you had the knowledge here, you'd be confused on what to mark because let's read the words of 51G closely. 51G says forest, lake, rivers, and wildlife. So forest, lake, rivers, and wildlife because it says that this is all covered here. Forest is covered, lakes is covered, rivers is covered, wildlife is covered. So you'd mark A and B. But it also says to have compassion for living creatures. So what should we go ahead and mark here? If we mark C, we're excluding A and B. And if we mark D, we are excluding C because C also says living creatures. In this circumstance, because it's a little confusing, I tried to go ahead and mark D because it encompasses as much as possible that's there in 51. So that's one possible reason you could mark D because it encompasses as many categories as possible. But another reason to mark D is also it doesn't say all living creatures, and that could be a form of pedantic reading of this portion of the Constitution. Of course, when it says living creatures, we mean that you want to protect all living creatures. But let's see what the consortium has to say about this. I'm sure that this question will be objected to. My guess is that either this question will be deleted or that all answers will end up being correct. So don't beat yourself up over it if you marked either D or if you marked either C. But I don't think they might accept it if you marked only A or only B because you missed out a lot of categories if you did not mark the others, right? So that's for question 65. Let's come to 66. As per the passage of the Supreme Court, um, so here you have to refer to what the decision of the Supreme Court is it says very clearly, and these are the exact lines that just copy pasted from the passage, not copy pasted, but more or less paraphrased, is that both have a duty. So this is fairly simple according to the passage, in my opinion. Now let's come to 67. Now this could have been a source of confusion for many, but let's figure out what it was. And of course, you're not going to find this and this. Uh, you'll immediately eliminate this. You'll be confused between A and B. What makes India committed? So it's important to realize here that you have to read the question closely, because they're asking what makes India committed. What makes India committed vis-a-vis other nations, which means in the international sphere, not committed to its citizens to provide them the right to life and the right to environment, which is what could have led a lot of you to go ahead and mark B for boy, because I believe that the correct answer here is A. So the Supreme Court verdict does make it mandatory to protect the environment, or makes it an enforceable right, but that doesn't, the passage doesn't use the words carbon emission directly in that context. But where it does use the word carbon emissions is in the context of international commitments. So it says here international environmental treaties, India signed the Paris Agreement, so on and so forth, has committed, and these are the exact words it uses, committed will generate blah blah blah, reduce carbon emissions, right? So the language of the passage has been directly copy pasted onto this option here, which is why I went ahead and marked A. This could be again a source of dispute. Let's see what the consortium has to say, but from what I can tell here, A should be the correct answer. Again, let's come to 68. This is D. Is very simple. For those of you who know the text of Article 21, this also required you to have additional legal knowledge. So if you did have that legal knowledge, congratulations, you have been duly rewarded in accordance with that. Let's come to this passage. This passage could have been confusing for many because it used a lot of terms that did not necessarily feature or were properly explained in the passage itself. For instance, it uses the words void ab initio. In order for you to understand what it means for something to be void ab initio, it means that it's void from the very beginning or initially itself, right? So, and that would also affect the way that you mark the options and you answer the questions. So it's important that you had some familiarity with this topic already. If you've been practicing legal for some time now, if you've been going through some books, then you would have understood, and you at least you would have come across this concept. It's a very fundamental and basic concept in contract law. So this is a correction. This is something that could have helped you if you had been ready with this beforehand. Let's come to question number 69. Which of the following describes a void agreement? This is there directly in the passage. So a void agreement is void from the very beginning, void ab initio, right? So if you know what the meaning of ab initio is, you can decipher what it means to be void from the beginning. Now let's come to 70. 70 is a fact application question. This also requires you to have some form of external knowledge, I would say, but I think it's possible to read the passage and to be able to answer this. A contract between two parties to rob a bank is obviously going to be an illegal contract, right? And the passage also says that illegal contracts are void contracts if they consist of illegal elements. So this is going to be a void contract. Now this one, 71, requires you to have some external knowledge. So let's figure out what happens where there's a contract between a minor child and the signatory is a minor himself, right? So if we try to understand, let's go for minor contracts. So this, you'll have some blog articles saying that they're null and void, not hereby expressed to be declared void, right? But if you notice here, it says such contracts are voidable, right? I'm not going to go into the authoritativeness or reliability of a particular source here. From what I recall, at least, this contract would be voidable, which is why I marked voidable. It's possible that it could be void as well, but it also, from what I understand, also depends on the kind of contract that's undertaken. So this is a little more complex, a little more nuanced than this question presents. Nevertheless, let's see what the consortium has to say about this question. This could be a source of dispute, again, because you required some external legal knowledge as well. Let's come to 72. Which of the following scenarios would most likely result in a void agreement? So you want to look at the agreement which has some illegal elements and an agreement to pay to get a government job is clearly illegal, so you will go with C. It's essentially a form of bribery. Let's Would you rather go with A here? So for those of you, some of you might have been misled with A because it says duress, and obviously duress is illegal, right? But duress would actually be a form of a voidable contract at the option of the person on whom duress was exercised. So for instance, if you force me to enter into a contract by threatening me for whatever reason, and later I want to get that contract executed, I have the option of getting that contract executed, and that's okay because I was the person on whom duress was exercised. So it's voidable at my option. So A would be a form of a voidable contract, not a void contract. Let's come to 73. Again, this is also external knowledge. None of this is mentioned in the passage at all. Let's figure out what happens when you have contracts without consideration. For this, you have to know a little bit of some contract law. So let's figure this out. So if you look at section 25 of the Indian Contract Act, agreement without consideration void, right? So this is, it's right here, plain and simple. You don't have to read any further or to read more than this. So if you know this, you have some legal knowledge, you're going to say 73C, right? Am I audible? Is it all good on that end? Okay, great. Let's continue. Let's come to GIs, geographical indications, this passage. Now, I think this was also fairly simple. A lot of it was mentioned directly in the passage. Which of the following statements is not true? This is fairly simple. If you read the passage, you understood what GIs are, you can immediately say that it's not any product anywhere. It has to be of a specific geographical location. Now, 75, this could be a source of dispute because it's not immediately clear what the consequences are if you have a tag that is does not sit well with the principles of GI. The consequences are not mentioned in the passage, so this is something that you'd have to figure out on your own. I think I use some common sense here to eliminate some options. So can be sold under a different name is not a legal action that is likely to be taken. So I removed C. Face no legal consequence is very unlikely because there's an infringement here. So common sense dictates that there should be some legal action. A, the product can still be sold, but with a disclaimer. Now, the passage says nothing about a disclaimer. And commonly, when there's an infringement, usually you will say that, okay, there's a prohibition or there's a legal action taken. So just on that basis, I went ahead and I marked B for boy. Now let's come to 76, which is following is not a potential consequence. This, I think, is entirely commonsensical. There is nothing in the passage that will help you answer this question. So in that sense, you're all out on your own. And if you're following the cardinal principle of looking at the passage to answer the question, you will be very stumped here because the passage just does not help you answer this question. So because I have some knowledge of intellectual property law, I went ahead and marked C. But those of you who did not have that knowledge might have struggled. Regardless, again, you can also use some common sense here. If you misuse GI, maybe consumers will not trust your products. Okay, perhaps that's sensible to say. There may be a decrease in the market value, and that directly results from the fact that customers might not trust your product, right? So it can go back and forth. It can go both ways here. So which is why I went ahead and D, obviously, potential, which of the following is not a potential consequence. Also, please make sure that they're asking this question. So A is a potential consequence, B is a potential consequence, D is also a potential consequence because if you've done the act of infringement, which is of course not legal, then you will face some legal action. C is a compulsory license. A lot of you might not know what compulsory licenses are, so that might stump you, that might trick you a little. But because it's not mentioned in the passage, or because you can't derive it commonsensically, I would say you could go for C here. C is definitely out of the ambit of this question altogether. So let's come to 77 now. Which of the following scenarios best illustrates the concept of geographic origin, right? So it's essentially asking you for what does it mean for a product to be correlated with a geographic origin? This is mentioned in the passage, and it's also quite commonsensical. You can eliminate B, for instance, if it says it's even though it's not, it is produced somewhere else, right? So it's not really affiliated to that region if it has no affiliation to it. So you can eliminate A, B very simply here. 78, choose the most appropriate objective. This is mentioned directly in the passage verbatim. This didn't require much debate, right? Let's come to the final legal passage here. 79, which of the following issues children who are victims of violence during childhood as per the author of passage? This is mentioned directly in the passage. You didn't have to consider it much. Again, B is also mentioned directly in the passage. You just have to read the passage. A is also mentioned directly in the passage. Sorry, let's come to 81 before that. Now, this might be a little bit tricky. This is more of a GK question than it is um, a logical, or sorry, a legal question. So that might have stumped you a fair bit because you might be wondering what the framework is, but it's not mentioned in the passage altogether. The NCRB, to the best of my knowledge, does all of these things, right? It does maintain a database of those who are in conflict with the law. It does. I'm not sure if it conducts forensic investigations. It does compile and analyze crime data. Of course, that's one of its primary functions, and it does maintain a database of enforcement of criminal law. So when multiple options could be correct, which one do you go ahead and mark? My method of doing it was to choose to proceed with the process of elimination. So I was not sure if they conducted forensic investigation, so I excluded this. Now, maintaining a database of fingerprints is a function, albeit a fairly small one out of many functions that it can perform, and it does perform. So to me, it didn't make much sense to go with B because while this is true, it's not its primary function, right? And that's what I would want to look for if I'm trying to eliminate and find one option. So I can't go with B here. So for me, it was between C and D. And honestly, this could go either way. There's no saying from the passage. I marked C. I'm sorry, I marked D for dog. The answer could also be C for cat. You can't really tell here. So it's okay if you were confused here or if you mark like any one of these. It's all right. But let's see what the consortium has to say. I foresee that this will be a source of dispute for many aspects, right? So 81 has been put out of the way. Let's come to 82 here. Which category had the highest number of cases under crimes against children? Now it does say here POXO, but if you marked C, that might also be correct because POXO includes only sexual offenses. So this would be a form of a sexual offense that has been marked here. So if you mark either A or C, it might be correct. Although the passage uses the language POXO, those are the exact words, it says POXO. So I would prefer here to go with POXO here. I don't know what the consortium will say about marking C as well. Let's see what has to be said. So, but it's either A or C here that I can tell. So let's now that we said 82 out the way, let's come to 83. For 83, you need some external knowledge. You need to know what the full form of POXO is. I do know this because I've studied this. So POXO is the full form is this. This is fairly simple. Let's come to 84. 84 again. This is also all mentioned in the passage. No sort of inferential process, inferential reasoning required at all, right? So we've gone through all three of these sections. Now we have the last two sections left, and of course, the ones that have stumped most candidates is you have logical and quants. Before we begin with this, we will take a small 2-3 minute break as well, and then we'll immediately proceed to this. Hi. Yes. Sorry. Let's get right back into it. I did need a 2 to 3 minute break to get right back to it. Otherwise, it's going to be difficult for my throat to sustain. Let's come to. I want to give a correction here. I just revisited one of these options in legal here. This category 82 would actually be B for boy, and this has to do with my misreading of the passage. So the exact lines are here. The top categories of cases were kidnapping and abduction, followed by cases so on and so forth. So that means kidnapping and abduction is one. So which is why the correct answer for 82 would not be either A or C. The correct answer would be B for boy, and this is fairly straightforward, right? Let's come now to logical. So which of the following would be the most suitable title? So you might be inclined now to say that the passage is largely about technology, and that's because a good chunk of the passage is spent on discussing technology. But I believe that the passage is broader than just technology. So let's see what we can eliminate offhand. We can definitely eliminate language and cultural change. I don't think the problem here is like cultural change as such, although that is mentioned. But if you look at the very first couple lines, it says, okay, we have rapid economic growth, and then we said lifestyles are being dramatically altered. So what does it mean for lifestyles to be altered here? So immediately that gives me the indication that perhaps lifestyle is has something important to do with the passage. Now, if you look at all the themes, it says one bit like you have number one, you have cultural changes. That's one. Number two, you have technology here, right? Technology is mentioned extensively here as well. Gadgets, you have two. Ultra processed foods, then you have three here. So these three reasons are also mentioned within the wide gamut of what we refer to as lifestyle, which is why I was more inclined towards A. While it's true that it's possible to say this is all a consequence of economic growth, but I don't think the author is making the point that economic growth has led to these problems. While the economic growth has led to lifestyle changes, the lifestyle changes are ones that are directly contributing to these problems. So for that reason, I eliminated B. And the passage is not just focused on the youth, while the youth do occupy a big portion of the passage. So which is why I eliminated C. And I also eliminated C because the passage is not discussing just technology, it's also discussing junk food and the lack of sleep, so on and so forth. So on that basis, I went with A, lifestyle changes. This could be subject to dispute. Let's see what the consortium eventually has to say about this, right? Now let's come to the very next one, 86. Consider the statement technologies and improved means. What does this exactly mean? So this was, I think, a little bit of a problem. I spent some time trying to decipher which option could be the correct one because none of them seemed to make much sense to me. But let's see what we can immediately eliminate, right? The line is saying technology is an improved means to an unimproved end, which means what it's trying to say is that technology has improved and it's faster, it's better, but the end has not improved. The end has remained the same, and the end is a deterioration in our lifestyle and then essentially our mental health. So that's what's going on here in 86. Now, which option closely corresponds with that idea? Let's try to figure out. Cannot be A. A says is contradicting what the line is about. Where we need to talk about an unimproved end, and focusing on positive results is not going to lead us to that. Let's look at the another one that we can eliminate. Mm, B, I think we can safely eliminate because it talks about physical health. The passage as a whole and the end, unimproved end that they're talking about in the context of technology is mental health and not physical health. So on that basis, we can eliminate B. Now it's between C and D, right? I had to decide which one of these would most closely approximate the given question stem. I personally chose C. But before I discuss why I chose C, let's discuss D. New technology should be looked upon with skepticism, considering its negative impact. Now, it does reflect the tone of the question stem of the sentence here, which is essentially saying it's an unimproved end. But I don't think that's what the statement is conveying. So the question is which of the following closely reflects the meaning of the given statement. And the meaning of the given statement is not that, okay, you should see all coming technology with skepticism. It's trying to question, while technology is improving, what is it improving towards? What is the end, right? So that's what it's trying to question. I could not find much of that in D here, just looking at it with skepticism. And C is not perfect by any means, of course. Poor mental health is a result of the invention of new technologies. It's also a very extreme statement to make. But personally, I think this could go either way. Let's see what the final answer key has to say. I went with C because it seemed to approximate the language of means and end, right? So if technology is a means to some end, then like the end here is that we have bad mental health in society generally, and that's a lifestyle issue. So the end here is poor mental health, and then means the process through which that's happening is new technologies. So technology is an improved means. So just on that basis, I went with C. But let's see what the final answer key says. I think this could be a subject of dispute. Now that we're done with 86, let's come to 87. Which of the following statements strengthens the author's argument regarding the negative use of smartphones amongst the youth? This was, I think, fairly simple. You can go with A here. The others don't strengthen the statement at all. Very easy to eliminate. So now that we're done with 87 as well, let's go to 88. Which of the following can be a plausible solution for better mental well-being among the youth? Um, Now, I think this is also fairly simple, and I don't think this is, you can find this in the passage. Again, a lot of common sense that's required to be used here, nothing that you'll get in the passage. Limiting the correlation between physical and mental health. I don't even know what that means, and I don't even know if it's possible to limit the correlation, obviously. So we're going to eliminate that. um, let's see what else we have. Limiting the research on excessive use of smartphones. You've got to be careful with the exact lines here. It's not saying limiting the excess use of smartphones, it's saying limiting the research. Obviously, limiting research on excess use is only going to damage your cause, not going to help it. So we're going to remove that. Limiting the widespread consumption of ultra processed foods makes the most sense, because it says that ultra processed foods can lead to a decline in mental health. So we're going to go with this. And again, be careful with D as well, because it says limiting the informed use. What does informed use mean? So when some use is informed, which means the use is being done carefully with consideration and not being done carelessly. So it's an informed use, and it's not the kind of careless use that leads to poor mental health, which is why I'm going to eliminate D. Which of the following statements by the author lack credible evidence in the passage? Now, this was also, I think, a tricky one. I don't think you could get this from the passage. This can also go either way. Let's see what the final answer key has to say. I honestly think this question was fairly arbitrary. I don't think there was a proper basis to determine the answer to this question, but let's give it a shot anyway, and I'll tell you what I marked. Excessive mobile usage linked to mental health issues. I felt like there was enough evidence here. So let's look at where they talk about mobile usage. Previous studies, so some empirical evidence being cited here, have found that ownership of smartphones is affecting the brain. It's not, data also suggests, right? So a lot of the language being used here is pointing to the fact that there is some evidence. Just on that basis, I eliminated A. And the same thing goes with B. Honestly, B and A are essentially the same claims. The way I see them, there's no difference here. Students learning the English language have weakened family relationship. So this is not even a claim made by the author, obviously. So you won't even find this in the passage. So you can just eliminate this outright. It's nothing that lacks credible evidence, because it's not even there in the passage, right? Now, I went ahead and marked D just on the basis of elimination, and also because in the portion where we discuss the lack of sleep here, inadequate sleep and junk food, there wasn't this language being used of having empirical evidence backing that claim up. So let's see where they discuss the lack of adequate sleep. India reports the highest growth of ultra processed food, as well as the lower levels of exercise and adequate sleep, right? Now, the link here should be drawn between the lack of adequate sleep and poor mental health, which there is no evidence to be drawn. There's no evidence to lead to making that claim here. As a result of which, I said that this must be the answer here, because there's no evidence, or there's no empirics to draw a link between inadequate sleep and mental distress, right? You don't find that in these parts of the passage, and you don't find that anywhere else as well. So just on that basis, I went ahead and marked D. Now let's come to 90. These gadgets are handed to adolescents, presumably out of convenience, then sound logic. Which of the following is most suitable explanation? Again, nothing that you can find in the passage. You just have to use some common sense. This is contradicting, this doesn't make any sense, this also doesn't make any sense. So it's C, because logic has taken a back seat. They've just replaced the word convenience with utility, right? That's what's gone on here. Now let's come to the mother of all contentions. I'm sure all of you are wondering what the correct diagram could be. So after the paper was over, I tried to draw the diagram once more just to figure out if I was going wrong somewhere. I believe that, and from what I've discussed with other people who've taken the paper as well, I believe that the options provided in the questions here are incorrect, and it's possible that that flustered you. The best thing that you can do in a circumstance like this is to just leave. When you figure out that you've been trying for so long, like you're at it for, let's say, 3 4 5 minutes, and you're not getting an answer, you should probably proceed and say, all right, you know what, I'm going to come back to this later. Let me finish these portions of the paper because they will be much easier to solve and I don't want to miss out on them. So that should be, I think, the ideal approach when you encounter something like this that throws you off. But anyway, let's discuss this now. So the good thing about diagrams that you can draw from a circle in a circle is that you don't have to have a predefined starting point. Because it's a circle, you can situate your characters wherever and go ahead and proceed to the diagram. But before I want to situate my characters, I need to know how many characters are there in the diagram. So right, you have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. So which is why you can see here I've put some numbers down here to ensure that I can count how many people are there. Let's put that down. Let's draw this again just for everyone's convenience and everyone's understanding. You have 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9. Also, you will see here that I solved this many times, not just one time. Okay, the rough work is not here, but it's not just once that I try to solve this. I try to solve this many times in the rough work in the span of the paper, and I could not figure it out. So I believe that there is a problem with this question, but let's come now to try and solve this. So let's see. The very first piece of information given here is Rohit is third to the left of Ram. So let's first place Ram here. You have Ram. Rohit is third to his left. Left is this side. So you have 1, 2, 3. So Rohit will be here. Rohan is fourth to the right of Ram. So Ram is here. 4 to the right. Right is this side. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And you have Rohan. Right. This is what's being done here. Next, Mohit is 4 to the left of Suresh. But where is Suresh, right? How do you know where Suresh is? It says here, Suresh, who is second to the right of Ram. So let's first map Suresh here because we need him to map Mohit. So Suresh is second to the right of Ram. This is 1, 2. So Suresh is here. Now it says Mohit is fourth to the left of Suresh. Now 4 to the left of Suresh. 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is where Mohit is. Now it says Sohan is third to the right of Sham. And this is where a lot of you might have been confused because you'll ask yourself, like, hold on, I don't know where Sham is. So how do I place where Sohan is? So I will show you that there's actually a way that you can do this here. Let's first figure out. I'm going to mark, just for the sake of clarity, I'm going to mark all the dots in blue. Now, what are the ones that are missing, right? How many spots are left to be filled? You have 1 spot here. I'm marking this in red. 2 spot here. You have 3 spot. So only 3 spots are left to be filled. How do you fill them? The 3 spots are, you have Mohan, you have Sohan, you have Sham. Let's try to place Sham or Sohan in any one of these, right? I'm going to start, there's only 3 dots, so this is not going to take too much time. So now I want to try and place Sham because it says Sohan is third to the right of Sham. So let me try and place Sham. Can I place Sham here? If I place Sham here, Sohan will have to be third to his right. Third to his right is 1, 2, 3. Not possible because Suresh is here. So I know for sure that Sham is not here. Right? Now let's try to place Sham here in this part. So then Sohan is going to have to be third to his right. So you have 1, 2, 3. Again, so this could be possible here. This is a possibility. Sohan is going to be third to the right of Sham. So Sham could be here and you could have Sohan here. Now, what could also have happened, and this is where the source of confusion lies for everyone, which is why I said there's a possibility that some questions here might be deleted, but we're yet to see what the consortium does, is you could also place Sham here, right? And the same thing, you would have to say Sohan is third to the right of Sham. Now, what is if Sham is facing this way? Sham's right is going to be here, right? Because this is going to be Sham's left because he's facing here. This is going to be Sham's right. So you'll have 1, 2, 3. It's possible then that Sham can be here as well and here as well, and Sohan could end up being here. So where do you place Sham if Sohan is also here? Sham can be also be here. And let's try to finish the whole set before we decide that, right? So now it's a little bit confusing, it's a little bit indeterminate, but let's see now. Mohan is not an immediate neighbor of Ram. So we have new information here. Ram is here, so Mohan cannot be here, and Mohan cannot be here. Now hold on, that gives us some information. There's only 3 spots left, and Mohan can't be in 2 places. So Mohan has to be here necessarily. So let me just erase this for the sake of clarity. Mohan has to be here. You should all have arrived at this stage ideally. Mohan is here for sure. So if Mohan is here, where should I place Sohan and Sham? I can only place them such that Sohan is third to the right of Sham. If I place Sham here, 1, 2, 3, I can't now because Mohan is here and Mohan cannot be anywhere else. So what do I have to do in a circumstance like this? I will have to place Sham here. Sorry, yeah, Sham here. Now it says Sohan is third to the right of Sham, which is 1, 2. But how do I do that? Right? Or let's say if I have to place, let me clear all of this. Right? So now I have 2 spots left and I cannot place them. I simply cannot place them such that Sohan is going to be third to the right of Sham. Because if I place Sham here, so I have 1, 2, 3, and this is Suresh. So Sohan cannot be here. If I place Sham here, I'll have 1, 2, 3. But how is this possible? Because Mohan is here. Mohan has to be here because he cannot be here and here. These spots are filled, right? So as a result of that, this might have led to some significant confusion on who can sit where. So that's something that you might have tried to resolve. You could not have come up with an answer with. Let's see. Also, I think I missed one spot here actually, which is why. Wait, so one, let me recount the spots just again. This is why I wanted to mark it out with separate colors. Hold on. So this is going to be a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So there's one more spot here, right? I missed that. Apologies. My original diagram reflects that. So if you look at this original diagram, I was trying to square it up with the original diagram. Let's recalibrate our calculations back by coming to the final 2 sentences, which is Sohan is to the right of Sham, Mohan is not an immediate neighbor of Ram. So we know Mohan is not an immediate neighbor of this one of Ram remains the exact same. So I'm going to go ahead and put no Mohan here. I'm going to go ahead and put no Mohan here. So Mohan can either be here or he can be here in 2 places. So now we can't say definitively where Mohan is. But now let's try and figure out again how can we place Sham such that we can fit both of them together. Sohan is third to the right of Sham. So if I place Sohan here, if I place Sham here, same exercise that we're doing, 1, 2, 3, not possible because Rohan is here. If I place Sham here, 1, 2, 3, not possible because Suresh is here. So Sham cannot be here. So Sham cannot be here. However, Sham can be here. Why is that? So if you say, can he be here? Let's figure it out. the YouTube comments are not accessible to me, so it's not a comment based stream. But let's figure out if this is possible. Can Sham be here? If Sham is here, what is his right? Right. So if he's facing this way, his right is going to be our left, and his left is going to be our right. So this is going to be Sham's left, and this is going to be Sham's right. So this is Sham's right. Sohan has to be third to the right of Sham. So you have 1, 2, and 3. Successful. Finally, we've been able to place Sohan and Sham such that they all fit, because Sham cannot be anywhere else. And we tried to figure that out. So if I place Sham here also, by the way, just to show you, 1, 2, and 3, he can't be placed here because Rohit is here. So Sohan can't be placed here. So Sham can't be here either. Sham can only be here, and that means Sohan is here. And if that means Sohan is here, where do we place Mohan now? We know that we can't place Mohan here. We already know that Mohan and Ram can't be next to each other. The only remaining spot is this one. So Mohan is going to go in this remaining spot. Finally, you have only one leftover spot here, and the leftover spot is the last person who's not mentioned here, who is Rakesh. That's it. So this is going to be the diagram that you end up with. I did multiple variations of this diagram in the paper. I was hoping that I missed something or that I couldn't understand something, but it turned out that I always landed up with this diagram. So we've gone through the diagram. If this confuses you, you can look at this one. This might be a little more easy, more convenient to refer to, the diagram that I've made in the pen. But now let's figure it out. What is Rakesh's position with respect to Rohan? Let's see if the questions add up. So Rohan is here. What is Rakesh's position with respect to Rohan? So it's 1, 2, 3. So it should be third to the left, right? But if you look here, there is nothing that says third to the left. And first of all, they're asking what is Rakesh's position with respect to Rohan. So it doesn't make sense for me to say 8 to the right of Ram either, because that doesn't answer the question. But even if we try 8 to the right of Ram, it doesn't add up. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. It's fourth to the right of, sorry, what is Rakesh's position, right? So Rakesh is just to the right of Ram. So it doesn't make any sense to say he's 8th to the right of Ram here. So it's all right if you get this wrong. Most people are expected to get this question incorrect. At least from what I have solved and from the many variations I've done, I couldn't get this correct. If there's someone out there who got this correct, then like props to them. Please let me know how you did your analysis, because I tried multiple variations and I didn't. So 91 I could not answer. Let's come to 92. Who is third to the right of Mohan? So Mohan is here. Third to his right is 1, 2, and 3 is Rohit, right? And so ideally you will go with D, none of the above here, but I'm not quite hopeful that that's going to be the actual answer. But let's figure it out. Let's see what the consortium says. 93. Who is fifth to the right of Rohan? You have 1, 2, 3. Sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So ideally it should be Ram, but Ram is not even mentioned here. This is according to my calculations. Again, I could be wrong. I will emphasize that. But I could not figure out who is going to be fifth to the right of Rohan, because according to my table, and I drew it multiple times, it ended up being Ram. So we're going to push this aside. We're going to eliminate this. Now let's come to 94. Who's second to the left of Rakesh? Rakesh is here. Second to the left is 1, 2. You have Sohan. So like, it's not either of these, right? Sohan is not mentioned here, and it's not data inadequate. The data is quite adequate because I've got this table. So again, I expect this question also to be gone. Or who's to the immediate right of Mohit? So Mohit is here. To his right, immediate right is Sohan. So let's see if Sohan is there. Sohan is here. So you go ahead and mark 95A. Who is third to the right of Sohan? So you have 1, 2, and 3. Third to Sohan's right. So 1, 2, 3. It ideally be Suresh, but you don't see that here either, right? So this might end up with some confusions. You might, and there's a good chance, and from all the aspirants that I spoke to, most people struggled with this analytical reasoning set. They weren't able to figure it out, and it's all right if you want. But this is my calculation. This is what I landed up with. Let's see what the final paper has to say and what they do with these questions, right? Let's just wrap up quickly the remainder of the logical section, and I'm sure all of you are anxious for the quant section. Now, this passage in particular, this is one sort of passage where it just didn't help me answer the given questions at all. The questions had very little to do with the passage, and It's more like you had to apply some sort of commonsensical reasoning here. So, and that's okay. You might feel a little lost, little unmoved, unanchored, but that's okay. It's a kind of passage that warrants that kind of knowledge and logic, so it's okay. What's the primary responsibility of being company's efficient consultant? This is very simple. This you can find from the passage, the first couple lines. Whom does the consultant work closely with? This is mentioned in the passage that they work with management. And like naturally, I think given the nature of the work that's described, they'd also work with different departments because it has to do with internal restructuring and organizations. So I went with B here. Now let's come to C. Imagine yourself as a consultant. What methods are you going to find? This is also fairly intuitive. You're not going to do guesswork. That doesn't. It's not a very good consultant who does guesswork or who does random selections or goes by social media only. So D is obviously comprehensive. D, which is falling matter consult, optimize. Again, very silly options here, just meant to be eliminated. So B makes the most sense. 101, why is communication the most relevant thing for a consultant? So this, I think you had to read the passage a little bit. It could be this could go either way, honestly. I personally marked A, but there's also a good chance it could go with D, because you're concerned also here, and from what I could gather here, you're concerned with the internal organization of the company. So let's see here. Entail operations such as logistic, redesign, business engineering, applications, so on and so forth. People management is a critical component of change management to make sure that all relevant parties interpret the potential alterations positively, right? So this you have to read the passage. I think the passage might actually help you. On a closer reading, I will say that A is much stronger because it asks for communication skills in the context of changes and alterations, right? So people management, critical components, change management, make sure all, so on and so forth. And this entails communication naturally. So as a result of which, I would read between these lines and I would say that A makes sense. Although I won't say D is strictly incorrect also. It seems to me that A is more comprehensive and on the dot as such. Again, I will preface all of this by saying that I could also be wrong. So let's come to 102 then. What additional support might a consultant provide to help the team adapt to new processes? Again, this is also somewhat debatable, but I think uh, the passage would ask you to read between the lines and to figure out what it is you could do that could, optimize the organization's ability to grow and remain relevant, so on and so forth. Again, the passage, I believe, does not offer much help in this. Personally, I think it's not a from what I understand of the consultant's role described in the passage, it's not the job of the consultant to provide personal counseling. So you'll put this out. Planning a retreat, again, quite out of the ambit of the passage, and also I don't know how that will help them adapt to new processes. Mental health programs could be possible. It's an alternative, or it could be helpful, but that doesn't directly help in the fact of helping them adapt to new processes, right? That's the key word. I believe the most immediate and direct way to do it is to offer training and support. And this is obviously vague, but I believe the fact that it's vague also means it's broad, and it encompasses a lot of things that could fall under training and support, as a result of which I think B should be correct here. Let's come to 103. For the above paragraph, which of the following statements is true? Now, this is an interesting one. I think there is some scope for confusion here. If you notice here, both A and B are effectively saying the same thing. They're not saying anything different. But this is not mentioned in the passage. The exact words used are third world countries where poverty is rampant or often thought to exist of in third world countries, and they're referring to homelessness here. But that's not mentioned here. It says, at best, homelessness was originally believed to be a cultural problem, but is now really revealing itself as a global problem. There's nothing in the passage to indicate that it's a third world problem. Culture does not equal third world. So just on that basis, I don't think A and B are correct. And if A and B are not correct, even D is not correct. So the only thing I could go for and mark here was C, which is what I went ahead and marked. Right? If that's out of the way, let's come to 104. There are several causes of homelessness. Which of the following is the least likely a cause of homelessness? Again, this is I not mentioned in the passage at all. The passage does not offer you any guidance. You just have to use some sort of commonsensical reasoning here. Violence in the home could lead to people being displaced from their homes. Yes, so I'll eliminate this. Substance abuse could end up leading to homelessness, and substance abuse is also mentioned, I believe, in the passage. So The loss of job of income obviously will lead to homelessness because you're not able to afford a home. Then D makes the least sense here, so you would mark it. So it's the least likely to be a cause of homelessness. Just because you're offered proper health care does not mean you will be homeless. In fact, it's possibly the opposite, right? So let's come to 105. Homelessness in the case of mental illness can be amplified because of the following reason. Again, passage offers very little guidance. I think commonsensically, if you just read all of them, D makes the most sense to me here. It can be amplified in all the above manners. So there's not much thinking personally, I think, to be done here. 106, homelessness and reference can be observed most closely in the form of, again, very poor guidance offered by the passage here. In that sense, it's suspicious drafting. But so B again is a very not necessarily a sign of homelessness. Inadequate entertainment is again not up the list when you're thinking of homelessness. I don't know what medial services meant. I think they meant medical services. But like, sure, if you're unable to afford a home, there's a good chance you're unable to afford medical services, but it's not a strong or a direct causal factor. So just on that basis, I would go for poor prospects of employment, which is, and there's a direct causal factor. If you're unemployed or unemployable, then there's a good chance you do not have access to the income to be able to afford a home. So that's it. On that basis, I went with 106. Now let's come to 107. This is quite interesting because it contradicts all the numbers in the passage. I reread the passage again and again, looking for a possible number. So the only two numbers in the passage are 1.6 billion and this one, 580,000. But neither of them are help us answer the question here. So 1.6 billion is not what we're looking for. This is overall the number of people who lack adequate housing according to a 2005 survey. But the question is asking here, how many people are currently experiencing homelessness on any given day, right? And the exact words in the passage are approximately 580,000 people experience homelessness on any given night. It doesn't make a difference when you say day or night, at least in this context. There's no difference to be made here. Regardless of that, the number is 580,000. It is not in the millions as the passage would suggest. It's not 1 million. It's not more than 5.5 million. It's in fact less than 5.5 million. It's 580,000, and it's definitely not any of these, right? My suspicion is that the person who has drafted this question has read 580,000 to mean 5.8 million. And on that basis, you would have probably marked B. But anyway, I don't think it matters what you mark here. I marked A, but it just doesn't matter because I think this question will be deleted in the end anyway, right? So let's come to 108 then. Which of the following is not a myth about people experiencing homelessness? Again, passage offering very, very little guidance, but very commonsensical reasoning can be used here. People who are experiencing homelessness are not because they are so out of their own fault or because they choose to be in that circumstance. There are often structural factors at play, and just on that basis, you would go here with D. So obviously, if you are unable to afford a home, there's a good chance you're unable to find a job as well, which is why you're unable to afford a home. So it's not a myth as such, but the rest are of course very extreme statements, and you can't make that claim of all homeless people by any means. So we're definitely going to go with D on this one. So now that we're done with this, let's come to quants. I know you guys are waiting for this. I know you've anticipated it, but let's take a 2 minute break again before we begin quants, and then we'll get right to it. Also, one final thing before we proceed, it has been brought to my attention that 89 could be different. So let's re explore 89 once again. So we discussed how there is clear evidence for A and B. So we eliminated A and B. Let's now come to C here. So the passage does mention a correlation with the use of English language. Let's locate that here. A preponderance of English in schools are also associated with weakened family relations. So now the question is, do you mark C or do you mark D? Right? Junk food, there has been some evidence provided here. So towards the end, it says some evidence suggests these foods are as addictive as smoking. And there's also one way to read this line such that you could say there's empirical evidence for the fact that sleep causes mental distress. It says India now reports, suggesting that there is some empirical evidence to back this claim, but there is no such language used in the context of English and weakened family relationships. So there's a good chance that the answer could be C here, right? Let's see eventually what the consortium ends up saying about this. All right, now that we've put that out of the way, let's move on. Let's go to quants. I know you guys are anxious about this. So, like I mentioned again in the beginning of this session, it's not going to be of much use here if you read the entire passage, these two things, and then sit down and dissect each and every piece of information, like marshal it into a caselet. It's not going to help you very much, because the questions are honestly standalone. There you can answer them without referring to the passage, at least most of them. So let's go question by question. If a female casual worker earns 200 per hour, what is the hourly wage of a male casual worker, given male casual workers earn 48% more than female casual workers? So this is fairly simple. They're saying 200, and what is 48% more than 200, right? So 48% of 200 you will find is 96. So you'll add 200 to 96 and you'll go for 296. So that's it. Assume now 110. Assume that the gap was 2.5 times, and 2023 the gap increased to 2.8 times. So what is the increase in the gap? So the gap increased by 0.3 times, right? And the initial amount is 2.5. So the way to find out a percentage increase is to do 0.3 by 2.5 into 100. So if you cancel, this is 4. 3 is 12%. So your answer is going to be A here. That's it, not much else. Which of the following statement is correct, right? So let's find this out. What I did here was a fairly simple one. This could be incorrect because I didn't spend too much time on the figures, but this is what I've done, right? Now the two options you have here is the wage gap of Goa and Kerala is less than Tamil Nadu. The wage gap of Tamil Nadu is greater than Jharkhand and Gujarat. What does it say about Tamil Nadu? It says here, this is the relevant line. Tamil Nadu has the highest gender wage gap among agricultural free laborers. So if Tamil Nadu has the highest wage gap among all states, which means that the wage gap of this is going to be less, obviously, because Tamil Nadu is the highest. And this obviously means that Tamil Nadu is going to be greater than Jharkhand and Gujarat because Tamil Nadu is the highest, right? It just says it's the highest. Just so on that basis itself, I marked C and I moved on. That's it. 112. If the wages paid to men working in agricultural sector are 335, what is the amount of wages paid to women in the region? So now they're asking you to find the wage disparity between women working in Goa uh, and men working in Goa. Let's figure out what the information is on the wage disparity between the two in Goa. The highest gender wage gap, so on and so forth. It is followed by Goa at 61%. So I know the wage gap is 61%. What does that mean? It means that men earn 61% more than women. How do I translate that into an equation? When I translate that into an equation, it means men is equal to 1.61 times women. And I know that it said here that men get 335, right? So men is equal to, so 335 is equal to 1.61 times women. So your answer is going to be 335 divided by 1.61. That's the calculation that you had to undertake. And if you were just to do that calculation like roughly, and you don't have to do absolute precision also, you will find here that that 1.61. Let's put that down. You'll find here that the answer is approximately 200 something. I personally got something like 200, 201 here. So you can notice here. So I went ahead and marked 204 approximately. So that's the answer that I got. Again, this is something that I'm calculating. This is what I marked. This could be incorrect. So that's how I solve this one. Let's come to 113 with reference to the information in question 109. Which region of the below mentioned states offers the least wages to women workers in any sector? So again, all you have to do is interpret different parts of this passage. Which one offers the least to women? So let's see here. Let's start from this part of the passage because that's when they start discussing the wage disparity in states. Field laborers make the most money in Kerala. A woman is paid 537. So let's Kerala 537. This is the highest amount paid to a woman laborer in a state. So I know it's definitely not Kerala, right? Because Kerala is the highest amount paid to any woman laborer. Let's see. Tamil Nadu has the highest gender wage gap at 112% for Goa, so on and so forth. The wage gap is the lowest in Jharkhand and Gujarat, but the women laborers there get paid just 239 and 247 respectively. So we can see here that Gujarat is higher than Jharkhand. Jharkhand is even lower. So we know for the fact that the answer cannot be Gujarat because we know that Jharkhand is lower. So it can only be now Goa or it can only be Goa or Jharkhand. So you now have to figure out which of the following is it. Is it Goa or is it Jharkhand? Also note the fact that it says with reference to the information in question 109 above. So let's go and reflect for a brief bit on what question 109 is. So this is about casual workers in general. It's not about workers across states. So I'm not sure how helpful this can be for us to answer this question. We still have to figure out how much does a woman earn in Goa. I don't think we can refer to the information in 112 because we know how much a woman in Goa earns just based on 112. However, they've only asked us to refer to 109, which does not offer any information on states. So this might have thrown you off because it's hard for me now to pick between Goa and Jharkhand. I think there are two possibilities. It's possible that they meant to say 112, and if they meant to say 112, then you would go for Goa here because Jharkhand says 239. So Jharkhand is 239. Kerala is 537. Goa, you don't know. And Gujarat, you know, is 247 or something, right? So just on that basis, you have to figure out now what Goa is. I personally, from what I recall, I don't recall perfectly what I did with this question, but I think it can go either way. I will have to refer back to my answer sheet once again to figure out what we did. But I think they meant to refer to question 112, in which basis we could have found how much a woman makes in Goa. But just from the passage itself, I don't think it's easy to decipher how much a woman makes in Goa. That's not mentioned here. It's just state wise, it's not state specifically mentioned. So on that basis, we will see what the consortium has to say and what approach they've taken here. But this could be a little tricky, might have thrown you off. Let's come to 114. If in 2023 average annual income is 250, how much do male self-employed workers earn on average, right? So this you have to refer to the passage, read this portion. In 2023, male self-employed workers earn 2.8 times that of women. So it's very simple. They're asking you to do 2.8 times of 250. So if you do 28 into 250, you'll find that it's 700. That's it. Fairly simple calculation. Now that this is set aside, let's come to 115. Now this could have thrown a lot of people off. I will explain. Mr. Das has a family, has a daughter. This is his total monthly income. Salary of 9228 and a 10% house rent allowance. So see, every time they use the words 10%, or just every time the percentage symbol is used, you have to ask yourself percentage of what? Like what are we looking at? What is the comparator here? And the easiest way I think to make sense of this 10% is to say that it's 10% of 9228. Now there are two interpretations of this when you say 10% of 9228. It could mean that this 9228 amount includes 10% of 9228, which goes towards house rent allowance, which means the remaining income that he would have is 9228 minus 922.8, which is 10%. Or, and this is the interpretation that I think the question is actually asking you to take, is you have 9228 plus 10% of 9228. That's what's going on here, right? So let me just confirm that my calculations with a calculator. So 9228 into 1.1 essentially is what the question is asking you to do, is going to give you 10,150, which is what I got here as well. So 10,150. Let me change the color a little bit. 10,0. So, sorry, 10,150. That's what it's asking you to get. This is his actual overall income because he's getting 9228 plus a 10% house rent allowance. Now, again, it's very time consuming if you sit down and you break each of these portions of expenditure down. It's just not feasible to do it, I think, if you are facing a paucity on time. You know that this is the number now, and all you have to do is break down different chunks from this number and you'll get your answer. So personally, I went straight to the questions. I didn't waste time in making a caselet. How much money remains for other expenses after the house rent and savings? Now, one very tedious approach to take is you calculate what the house rent and savings is, like 18% is house rent and savings is 12%, and then you go ahead and like minus it from 10150. Instead, what you can do is just see what is the percentage of these two. So if house rent is 18% and if his saving is 12%, 18 plus 12 is 30%. So if they're asking you what is other expenses, that is not included in the 30%. So naturally, this is going to be 70%, right? So all you have to do is do 7 into 1015, and your answer, I think, will come to this from what I remember correctly. Yeah. So that should be your answer. That's the easiest, quickest way to do it. Now let's come to 116. If the expenditure on food and entertainment is increased by 10% due to inflation prices, what will be the percentage of savings in the same monthly salary? Now, this could also be a little tricky because now this actually requires you to manually calculate. I have to take out what food and entertainment is, right? So first, food and entertainment is, where is that? Food is 9% is entertainment. So you have 9% of 1001, oh sorry, 10150, which we will do, and food is 25%. So total, they're asking you to do 34% of 10150, which that's not the actually not the way we have to do it. Let's break them down first because there's going to be a 10% increase in each. So you have 9% of 10150, which is going to give you 913.5. And this is something you have to calculate, which is why you will see like all the messy calculations. Like this is exactly what I've done here. And 25%, instead of doing 25% or like into 25, you can just divide it by 4, right? Which is a much easier, convenient way to do it. Saying something is 25% of something is the same thing by dividing it by 4, because 25 into 4 makes 100. This will give you 2537.5. Now what they're saying, what happens is these two are increased by 10%, right? An increase of 10% means 10% of this is 91.35. You can say 91.4 for the purposes of convenience. And 10% increase in this, you should just push the decimal here, is 253.75, or you can just say 253.8. So this is going to give you 514.3. So you're going to have 345.2 is going to be the overall increase in the expenditure that results from this inflation, 10% due to inflation. So now the question that is being asked is, what happens? The savings are going to reduce now. By how much are the savings going to reduce? So this, when they say that the savings are going to reduce, presumably this is going to be taken off of the savings. So this 345 increase that went into food and entertainment is going to be taken off of savings. But for that, we need to figure out what savings is first, right? So savings is 12%. And if I have to do 12% of that much, let's figure it out. So you have 12 into 10150, which is going to give you 1218. So this is the amount that's going into your savings. That increases by 345.2. So that is going to go ahead and give you 1563.2, I believe, right? If you just add that up. So this is going to be the increase in your savings. Um, Now they're asking you to find out what is the new percentage of savings in the same monthly salary. So how much is 1563.2 out of 10150? That is the question that's being asked. So you have to figure this out quickly. Let me just do this calculation. I did a very rough calculation on the paper. So if you are someone who is quick with numbers, it will benefit you like very, very greatly to do something like that. And that's what I've endeavored to do, try to do here. So that's something that you should try to. Oh, sorry, I've actually added it here. I'm supposed to subtract it. Let me subtract. So you have to subtract 344 from 128 here, or 1218 here. I'm going to do 1218 minus 344, which is going to give me 874. Now, how much is 874? Um, this is my new savings. How much is a new percentage in the same monthly salary? So the basic calculation to do is 874 by 10150, which is going to give you approximately 8.6%. Right. So your correct answer is going to be this. This is a little lengthy and long-winded, so it's okay if you left this for later. Let's come to 117. How much total money has he spent on food and entertainment? So this is something that we've actually already calculated before here. So we had food here, we had entertainment here, which is 34%. And all you have to do is add these two up. So you have 2537 plus 913. And so you just do that quickly now, and that will give you this number, 3541. That's it. So how much money does Mr. Das pay as the house rent? This is very simple. You just have to do 18 into 10150 because 18% is the house rent, and that is going to end up giving you this number. 19. If Mr. Das gets 12% annual interest on savings. Now, this is, I think, the interesting question. I haven't figured it out. So if someone else figures it out, please do let me know. But from what I could understand from the question, I believe I simply left this question. I couldn't decipher it, and I was also close to running out of time, so I just left this question. If Mr. Das gets a 12% annual interest on savings, so the savings, as we've seen, is 12% of 10150, which is 1218. These are your savings. And he wishes to save 30,000 in 2 years period. How much extra should he save in the next year? Now, your savings every year is going to be 1218, right? Because that's 12% of your savings. And the question says if he gets 12% annual interest on these savings. So like we can do that calculation and all, but that'll roughly come out to, let's say, like 150 rupees odd, somewhere there, 140, 450 rupees odd. But that's not going to give you 30,000. That is my concern. It's a very far-fetched amount to reach just from the savings, and that's the most sense I can make from this question. Gets a 12% annual interest on the savings, which is this much, and wish to save 30,000 and save 30,000. So we're only referring to the savings. We're not taking his base salary at all. So it doesn't make sense to me how 1218 would jump to 30,000. Perhaps there's an interpretation of this question that I'm missing here. There's an alternative way to interpret this question. This is how I interpreted this question, right? So you take the savings and how much extra should he invest to make it 30,000? It's a lot more money than any of these numbers, obviously, because it's a big jump from 1218 to 30,000. So I believe that I may have either interpreted this question incorrectly, or perhaps there's an alternative way of interpreting this question that will allow us to derive an answer. But as it could stand, I couldn't figure this out in the time of the examination, so I just left this. I moved on. Now let's come to 120. This one is actually fairly simple. Again, do not waste time like breaking down each of these expenditures, like multiplying them into 10150. Just you already know what the percentage is, right? So when you know that something is 18% and something is like, let's say, 9%, you know that 18% is going to be more than 9% of whatever. So you don't have to sit down and like break down the calculation about which is more. You can just like take the percentages and decide which one of these. I think this came up to equal, so it's not this. And when I was calculating this, I think this did not come to equal. One of them was more. So I went with this. Again, these calculations were made very hastily, so I could be wrong, but it's a very simple calculation to do. You just have to plug the numbers in and see which one is more, which one is less. That's about it, right? So that would concludes the analysis of this paper. Please let me know if you guys need anything or there's anything else. I know a lot of you might be feeling dejected. For those of you who are watching this analysis stream, you're also anxious, right? Now you're waiting for your results, which should be out somewhere in the span of a week. I will say you still have ALET to look forward to, so please don't think that this paper was like the end of it all. And I'm obviously, and you might have noticed just throughout this analysis, this paper was not exactly the best drafting that the consortium has to offer. And there will be, from what I can foresee, a fair few deletions that will be made in the final answer key. So please don't think that your score is going to be final just based on the kind of experience that you had today. But even otherwise, I'd say that please keep your head up. Like, there are obviously many more avenues that the law has to offer. If you are like me, passionate about the law, then it doesn't matter which law school you end up in. It just matters how much you want to do what you want to do, and the all the things that you want to do, and most of the things that matter come when you're a part of law school. And it doesn't matter which law school you're part of, the name is irrelevant. What matters is that you put your effort into making something of what you want to make. You'll come here and you'll discover what your passion is, what you're interested in, and you will refine that. And I urge all of you to not think that this paper defines you, or that it's it could be the beginning of your career, but it's certainly not the end of your career, right? So please don't think of this paper in that way. Do keep in touch. Let me know how you feel like when the results come out. We can discuss what the results are. Perhaps we'll have a new update on that end as well. But that concludes my portion of the analysis. I have given you what I've marked. There's a chance that some of the things that I've discussed and some of the answers that I've given are incorrect. But these are just my preliminary thoughts after having taken the paper today. Let's see how the final paper looks like. And I hope to see you guys to talk to me after the results come out. All the best, and please take care. Bye bye.